Hey everyone, this is Gioni on Reviews, and I know I'm late to the punch on this one, but I really want to talk about Justin Bieber's new album, Justice, today. So, on the surface, you might wonder why on earth I'm even bothering. I mean, it's Justin Bieber, and I'm so clearly not in the target audience for his new album that you might as well wonder why on earth I'm bothering. Well, I have two responses to this. One is that, yes, while I'm clearly not in Bieber's target demographic, there's technically no reason why I couldn't be. After all, I'm a pop music nerd who lives and breathes top 40 pop, which is exactly what Justin Bieber's going to be striving to make with this. So I'm not quite as removed from his audience as you might expect. But it's the second counterpoint I have to that carries a little bit more weight. And it's that every single song that was released in the lead up to this new Justin Bieber album had my pop critic senses tingling in the best possible way. And just one listen to this new album Justice really revealed to me that I had an album on my hands that really lends itself to the way that I like to talk about pop music. I don't really know how to explain this, but whenever a pop star goes through some kind of transitional identity crisis, I tend to have a field day deconstructing it. And this album, it feels like exactly that to me. Pair that with the fact that the singles were all over the map in terms of quality, and the fact that the album is called Justice, which might imply some kind of redemption narrative arc, or at least something adjacent to that. And yeah, you have an album that seems like it was just made for my review format. Granted, as you can probably tell, despite my excitement, I was not expecting it to be good. I thought both Lonely and Holy were mediocre at best, but at least Anyone and Hold On, they showed some promise in the production at least. But even if it's not good, I still clearly had to hear it. So how did it go? How's the album? How's Justice? Well, the funny thing is that while this album is absolutely a failure marred by underwhelming to downright terrible songwriting and utterly sterile production, there is a small part of me that does kind of appreciate the effort that the album makes. It might not be an artistic risk for Justin Bieber, but at least it's an album where the stakes feel a little bit higher than I expected. And even if it doesn't work for a lot of reasons, Bieber and his collaborators, they've tried to make a worthwhile statement here and kind of succeeded in a weird way, albeit almost certainly not in the way that they would have hoped to. And a combination of all of this makes this album absolutely fascinating to talk about. So I say let's get into it. Because yes, it's bad, but I recommend you hear it if you haven't already, because it is definitely fascinating. But the failures of this album are many, and they start with Justin Bieber himself as a performer on these songs. Make no mistake, he can certainly sing. I mean, I would kill for a voice like his, let's be real. But unfortunately, he has zero expressive presence and unique charisma behind the microphone, and therefore ultimately fails to elevate the overplayed relationship songs that fill this album that might demand more intense passion from his delivery that simply is not coming through. Furthermore, he ends up woefully outclassed by some of his guest stars a lot of the time, most notably by Daniel Caesar and especially Giveon on Peaches, where their distinct vocals make for a nice break from Bieber. And I actually think Dominic Fike does very well opposite Bieber as well, bringing a unique swagger to Die For You that was very welcome. Unfortunately, the rest are kind of a mixed bag. I didn't find Beam's autotune soaked verse on Love You Different all that inspiring, and I still think the Kid Laroi has one of the most obnoxious voices in mainstream pop from what little I've heard of him, and him showing up on Unstable was not pleasant whatsoever. Then there's Khalid, an artist that I do mostly like, but his unique vocal timbre clashes so badly with Bieber's on As I Am that when they try to sing together, it just sounds awkward and unflattering. And the only other two of note are Chance the Rapper and Burna Boy, who I guess don't embarrass themselves, but I'm not sure anyone would care enough to point it out even if they did. And speaking of things that most people don't care about, the production on these songs. Because let's face it, no one is going to a Justin Bieber album for state-of-the-art production, are they? And I get the serious impression that not a lot of thought, care, or attention went into making these songs sound that interesting, or even all that catchy. And you know what? That might be the most dumbfounding thing about the music on Justice. I love pop music because while it might be built to be disposable, it can transcend that simply on melody and catchiness alone. But there are so few memorable, bright melodic hooks on this album that it's kind of shocking. The bass lines are instead emphasized as the primary melody in these mixes more often than not, which can work for someone like Dua Lipa who can carry these songs on charisma and intensity alone. But when you're stuck with Justin Bieber, the formula becomes a lot harder to pull off. I guess the popping percussion and throbbing bass against the piano on Ghost has some distinct shimmer that I do really like actually. I'd probably say the same about Love You Different if that tropical synth line didn't give me flashbacks to 2016 that I'd rather not have when that sound was huge in mainstream pop. But you know what? Songs like Hold On and Deserve You, where the bass does have more bouncy groove to it, I could see a time and a place where these songs might work, and they are among some of the catchier here. And like, I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but even though the hook on Somebody is an incomprehensible, washed out blur, the sharper percussion does give that song an infectious momentum that I grew rather fond of. And Anyone probably falls into a similar category for me, the subtle, pattering beat acting as a solid foundation, and along with Ghost, it's one of the few moments where Bieber's sincerity really comes through. It sounds like he's giving a little bit more of himself on these songs. But that might be the biggest part of why the album doesn't work, and to address this demands we talk about the songwriting on this thing, and to put it bluntly, yeah, it's a bit of a disaster. Now, it might not start off all that badly. Too Much is a perfectly innocent love song about not wanting to waste any time that he could be spending with his girl, and it certainly is a sweet sentiment that sets up the album to come, a selection of starry-eyed love songs that are clearly aimed at his wife, Hailey Baldwin. But while this might be true to an extent, it also kind of isn't, as Justice is an album juggling two very distinct narratives. One of them being the aforementioned relationship with his wife, and the other being more internal, him grappling with his insecurities about the whole thing. Sounds thematically ambitious on the surface, right? But for however much, yeah, that might be true, I do think it's quite an ambitious arc. It doesn't take long in the track list for you to realise you're still listening to a clumsily written Justin Bieber album. Take Unstable as the most obvious example, where Bieber admits to trying to scare this girl away early in the relationship and admits his insecurity about the whole thing, even as she loved him through all of it. But the icy, cold, unfeeling production, along with the Kid Leroy's obnoxious voice, makes it impossible to buy into Bieber's romantic sincerity. And without a decent bridge to flesh out more of the details of those insecurities, the song feels like a unfinished fragment more than anything else. And on that topic, the painfully undercooked Off My Face also falls into this category, which includes the line, "Even sober, I'm not thinking straight," and "I'm forever ruined by you." Look, I have no problem with Bieber framing love as a losing battle like he does on this song, but maybe he shouldn't have put it on an album that's going for this pure, unfiltered romantic sincerity, because it seriously muddies the mood, especially placed this early in the track list. And believe it or not, it's not the only moment in the track list where this album stumbles hard thematically. A few songs later on Somebody, he's talking about how everyone is just looking for that somebody who will love them unconditionally, and how lucky he is for having found that person in his life. But if the most you can offer this girl in this relationship is just being a shoulder to cry on, as he says on the last line of the hook, it severely undercuts the romantic sincerity and implies a rather disposable relationship that, again, does not fit within the context of this album's themes whatsoever. And let's not pretend Loved by You is any better, which includes the line, "I hate the way I need to be loved by you." It's just ugly, it's sour, and Justin Bieber has the uncanny ability to make love feel and sound like work, and Burna Boy's abbreviated verse here certainly doesn't help. Then you get the lyrics that are just plain clumsy. As I Am tries to highlight how his partner has loved and supported him through all the bad times, but ends with the line, "It's a miracle you didn't run away." Just another example of Bieber's insecurity overshadowing any kind of romantic edge that these songs might have, and his determinedness to construct the most self-indulgent product that he can. Then there's the awkward Christian pop song Holy, which includes a line highlighting how he's running to the altar like a track star. Again, one of the clumsier lines here. At least it's not Love You Different, where Bieber describes how he wants to make babies with his girl. No one has ever made that phrase sound sexy or appealing. Ever. At least not Justin Bieber. It's almost as embarrassing as him calling his girl his badass bitch on Peaches. Yeah, sure, I do not buy that for a second. But if Justice was just a badly written and sterile pop album, that would be one thing. But what shifted this album into being downright unlikable for me? Yeah, it comes on Mlk Interlude. We've got to talk about this now. So the interlude is an excerpt of Martin Luther King Jr.'s But If Not sermon. Now, I can't speak for anyone else, but in my opinion, Bieber appropriating the narrative of one of the most important figures in the civil rights movement for himself and then inserting them into his artistic narrative on an album as self-indulgent as this one is, screams to me as being in painfully bad taste at best, and at worst, an incredibly mindless decision for which Bieber deserves all the scorn he has received. And Bieber doesn't help himself by following that interlude with the song Die For You. That could easily be understood as him comparing his willingness to die for his lover to Martin Luther King Jr.'s willingness to die for the pursuit of justice in the fight against racism in America in the late 1960s. I get that this is clearly not the intended interpretation, but the fact that the sequencing on this album is that sloppy to even create this interpretation as a possibility makes the album reek of just sheer non-effort across the board. But however much everything about what this album is trying to do thematically makes me want to tear my hair out, there are a few songs where the songwriting does kind of come through. Just enough for me to consider this album as not a complete waste of time. Deserve You, Die For You, Anyone. These are perfectly decent love songs I probably wouldn't skip if they came on the radio or on a playlist. And however much Somebody really annoys me, the groove on that track is so solid that I'd probably stick around for that one too. But my pick for best song on the album is easily the track Ghost, where Bieber talks about what he would do if his partner were to leave him and the value of the memory of someone, regardless as to whether or not the relationship works out. After all, young blood might think that there's always tomorrow, but he's grown up since then and he's ready and willing to confront the very real possibility that the relationship might not actually work out. It's probably the sole moment of emotional maturity on what is an incredibly self-indulgent and lyrically underwhelming album. But to wrap all this up, remember when I said that this is an album that really lends itself to the way that I like to talk about and consider music? Yeah, so the result of this is that I find it very hard to downright hate this album. I don't know, but part of me kind of thinks it's too fascinating to hate. More a hilarious corporate miscalculation than anything all that aggressively unlikable. That being said, this album still fails decently hard across the board, with the few brighter moments or more interestingly written moments being enough to make me inclined to be a little bit more charitable, but far from being enough to actually save this album. I know I'm being a lot kinder than I probably should be, but this is getting an extremely cautious 4 out of 10. And despite Peaches going to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, I thoroughly expect the album to fade from the public memory very fast. Just watch. So, thank you very much for sticking around for the full review. If you did stick around for the full thing, thanks very much. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next one.